Hi, everyone. This is the Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Younger, your host. Employee experience is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing of some of their imperfections that we realize their true brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself in the stories my guests tell about times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a deeper connection with their team and heightened leadership prowess. Before we move on and you hear the show today, I want to make a special request of you. I would like this podcast to remain successful and to increase the amount of listeners and people who are downloading it. And in order to do that, I need to get more reviews. So, for anybody who is a listener, and if you love the show, please go and do a 5-star rating and write a review anywhere you listen. And then screenshot that. If you screenshot that and you email me at heather@customerfanatics.com, heather@customerfanatics.com, then in the next show, I will give a kudos to you for doing so, because I actually am very appreciative of anybody who does write those reviews. And if you already have done so, thank you very much. Thank you for joining the show and enjoy this one. Hi, everybody. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast. And I'm really excited today to bring Cynthia Grant on the show. So I was attending an event. It's called the C-Suite Awards. And I was there with one of my coaching clients and a client that I work with, a bank that I work with. And I was just listening to different people coming up and down on stage. And there were a couple that were pretty impressive. But when Cynthia came up, she was talking about kind of like why she was there and giving a lot of kudos to her team. Really, they wanted you to like minimize what you said, period. They wanted you to just talk about a funny story or a trip. But she made sure to slip in that, it was all about the people in the audience, her people that had shown up to support her, that really made it possible for her to be where she's at and for them to accomplish what they have. And I was just taken by that. I absolutely love when people do that. So Cynthia, you were on the show because of that reason. Welcome.
That's great. Thanks, Heather. Thanks for having me.
So where are you right now anyway in your leadership journey?
Well, right now I work as an executive leader at an organization called All Health Network. We are one of 17 private not-for-profit community behavioral health centers in the state of Colorado. And my role here is to support the leadership across our clinical divisions, quality improvement, and risk and compliance. So even though I'm a leader, I have 8 incredible leaders who report to me, who then have a team of their own leaders and staff who provide direct services. My job is to work with my leaders to give them hope and to support them as they work with other staff to help them on their recovery journey in their healing from mental health and substance use issues. My title is a Chief Clinical Officer, but I often think that titles aren't really representative of what we do and who we are, so I always like to be able to tell the story of all the other people I support that happen to be under my title.
I love that. I agree with that. Even like when we talk about on the show, and even the book that I'm writing, it's that leadership at the heart concept for me is really about also how we lead ourselves first. And so for those who might be listening, who aren't yet managers of people, let's say you want to be a manager, because some people aren't managers that listen in. And so in that regard, we want to make sure that we focus also on the ways that leaders of the heart lead themselves first, because you have to know how to do that well before you attempt to even think you're going to do the same thing for other people. So I love that idea of like, let's put the title aside and then let's really talk about functionally, what are we doing together? So that's awesome.
Absolutely. Yep.
So how do you think the people that are, those 8 direct reports and maybe even the people that report to them, how do you think they would to describe your leadership style?
Hmm. I think that who I am as a leader is really consistent with who I am in my personal life. So whether I'm at home or at work, I am a very authentic leader, and my staff know that. My style is based very much on connection and trust. It's really important for me to be able to be connected with the people that I work with. I want them to know that they can always come to me, that we can put our heads together to be able to figure things out. And so I think that they would very much describe me as being a very real leader, and that they know that I trust them, that that's part of the foundation of our relationship, and it's mutual. So that trust means that they're going to function autonomously, and they know that I give them that space to do that, but that when they hit a roadblock or if they need help, that they know that they can also come to me. So I think that dynamic in terms of just being who you are as a leader when you're with your people, and making sure that it's real and authentic and trusting is I think that most of my folks would say that that's very much who I am.
And it's just this, what you're saying, it just totally drives home how I saw you or received you on stage, not knowing you. You see, I just immediately reached out. I'm like, oh God, she's got to get on my show. And there were hundreds of people on the room, hundreds, right? And there were many people that went on stage, but there's something the way you presented it. So when you said this, I bet you that there's no doubt in my mind that this is true. Okay. So then my next question is for you is I'm thinking, what is your drive to lead? Why are you a leader? Where did it stem from?
So that question's always a really interesting one, and I have two different perspectives that I think are worth sharing. The first is what drives me now. And so just like you heard me say that my leadership style and who I am as a leader is very consistent with who I am in my life, I've always believed that the concept of a work-life balance is a little bit of a misnomer, because my work is a part of my life. And of course, I like to recharge and spend time with my family and friends, but I also view my work family as an equal part of my life. And so because of that, relationships that I have with my coworkers are almost as important as the relationships I have with my kids or my husband. And I'm very much driven to take care of things at home and at work. And I feel an incredible responsibility to both. As I've moved up in my field in terms of titles, I felt that to be even more true. And so my role is to take care of my people so that they can take care of others. And that's a huge driver for me in terms of the responsibility that carries. But I'm going to be vulnerable and put myself out and share something with you and anyone else who's listening to the podcast, is that I also think that what drives me as a leader and where that comes from, the second part of that comes from my past. And so when I was a child, my parents had a really difficult time. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and obviously you heard me say I work in the behavioral health field. Well, I didn't land here by accident. There was substance use, mental illness, domestic violence, and a lot of neglect by my parents in terms of their responsibilities. So much so to the point that my brother and I were ultimately removed from the home by the Department of Human Services. And I'm not going to go deep or get into therapy or anything like that, but I watched my parents struggle and try and figure out how to parent and to partner one another at the same time. Their own work fell by the wayside. There were long periods of instability and unemployment in my family. And so my response from a very young age was to step up and to work both at home, caring for my brother, at school, and with jobs. And I know that my parents were doing the best that they could, but I had to grieve the fact that my parents were not going to be who I needed them to be. And so if you think about how when you get support from other people, you really do, I was able to find a way to be resilient in the face of adversity, and how to channel the struggles that I was having into some type of person and purpose. And I really learned that if you commit yourself to a role that has meaning and you give it your all, for me, that things are going to be okay. And that's really a driver for me today, and it's probably representative of my belief in how I lead, with that connection, with trust, with being authentic, a belief in good intentions, that people are doing the best that they can. And when you put your every being into that work, then I really think that we have the best success at leading others. I know. I'm like, should I tell her? Should I not?
It is so
but
rich
I think that it's very, it's
amazing.
very consistent. It's part of who I am. It's my background. It's been in my bones for a long time. I've been taking care of people, clients, organization, coworkers. That's part of who I am, and I'm proud of that.
It's so rich. I don't know if you know this, this is the reason why it's really hitting me, is I just recently in May, I did my first TED Talk on transforming adversity into opportunity.
Congratulations. Yeah.
And it's the topic that you just talked about, that idea of like having a background that really was kind of crazy, and then being able to figure out what you do with it and to reframe the circumstances and to kind of continue to move forward. But that idea that you talked about, which is exactly what drives me to do what I do, which is like, as that child, I didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't feel important. I didn't feel like I got a say in it. And so now the work that I do in the employee engagement space with making sure that all employees have a seat at the table, even if they're not physically there, that their voices are being heard at all levels of the organization, and that organizational leaders are actually doing something with those voices to drive the culture forward. And it's absolutely because of what I felt like when I was a child. And so that caring component of like, I want to care and advocate for you because I didn't feel like I was cared and advocated for. And I don't mean holistically. There was a lot of care in my house, but there was a lot of the other idea of like drugs and all of that, where I'm the only child, and then being the person who's the adult in the home ends up being interesting too. So you're speaking to me like this is like, wow, kind of crazy.
Yeah. And we're not alone. There's a lot of people who really didn't have sort of the right kind of supports at different key times in their life. That it is traumatic. There's a lot of research on how trauma impacts our development and our attachment to others. And if you think about that, there's a lot of different pathways that can go down. And you said it much more eloquently than I did in terms of being able to really bring that to the forefront. I think that sometimes that makes the best leaders, when you know how to push a connection, when you're not afraid of conflict, when you really, really care about your people, and that's a responsibility that we have. So that's part of my background. I can't undo it, and I am probably a better person because of it. It's part of what makes me who I am.
That's just amazing. I know the people who are listening are like, oh, wow. And
oh,
wow. You may have thought, wow,
choice,
what was
right?
me?
Yep.
Oh, I appreciate it. Okay. So for those who are listening, like we hear about this, we hear about where you're driven. You're just a wonderful person. I was drawn to you, but there's like all times, right? Like when we weren't that best version, like we weren't the person we are today. And it could be a product of this. Most often it's a product of the background, but there's a lens that we have, and we may have it as one time, and then there's a turning point that makes us change that lens. So I'm curious to know if you have a specific example of a time when you were not that best example of a leader, when you weren't so proud of who you were. What did that look like specifically? And then what did you do to come out of it, to kind of be more enlightened like you are today?
Yeah. That's the gift of failure, right? That's always a tough one, that requires us to be willing to work through those situations, whether it's personal or professional. Whenever I think about times when I'm not at my best, I can't help but draw from the work of Brené Brown. She's such an expert on the topic. Are you familiar with her work?
Yes.
Okay. Her work has taught me that anytime you're going to put your whole heart into your work and that you're truly willing to show up and be vulnerable with your ideas and your commitment, the uncertainty and risk that we have as leaders, that means you're going to get knocked down. And we have to be willing and able to get back up. She has a quote that I wrote down in preparation for talking with you. It's in her book, Dare to Lead, and it really resonates with me. She wrote, "I know I will eventually fail, and I'm still all in." And I think that it can be really challenging and scary to lead knowing that you're going to get knocked down and that you're still going to have to stick with it and persevere. And I have definitely had situations, both in the past and present, in thinking about sort of a specific situation. I don't think there was any one event, but I do think that there are times when this happens to me, even now, because I'm still an imperfect leader and still need to be able to put myself out there. I had a situation where I made some strong comments in a meeting, and I was really frustrated, and I felt a coworker was not valuing the work of two of my staff. And so I called him out publicly in the meeting and shared some thoughts that I expressed probably, definitely more harshly than I intended. And the meeting that I was in where this happened, it really wasn't a safe space for disagreement. And so when I said something, it was pushing against sort of the disconnect that I had with some of the people in the room. And I wound up having a very painful experience as a leader where my behavior was called to the mat. And it was really, it was a tough situation. It triggered a lot of shame in me. And all of my shame shields went up, if you will. And so the ways that we react when we're feeling shame, whether it's using sarcasm or getting angry, or on the flip side, saying yes when you really want to say no. And the shame that I think we feel, even as leaders in the C-suite, it's such a painful and universal feeling that makes us feel very flawed, very disconnected, and very unworthy. And so what I have had to do is I've really had to work through this time and time again to ask myself, what do I need to learn and understand about myself every time I fall? What's underneath my response? What did I need to understand better about other people in the room? And being able to reconcile with how I can be all in a less than ideal work relationship or even a personal relationship, that's a big life lesson. And so when you asked sort of what came out of the situation, I mean, there's a lot of pain and a lot of shame that comes out when we fall as leaders. And then on the flip side, the opportunity to be able to really increase your own sense of worthiness, your authenticity, and realize how you were acting outside of those values. And so I've had a lot of conversations since then with the colleague and some of the other folks that were in the room when I had this situation where I was too harsh with my words. And I'm still learning to reset, to connect, and to sort of reality check some of the stories that we tell ourselves in those situations, and really probably trying to be kinder in a way that keeps me grounded, that, we're all in this together. It's not easy. The personal is part of the professional, and really being able to figure out how we can lead together even when we make mistakes.
I like that idea of how can we lead together. I'm writing this down right here.
Yeah.
Well, because, I always say we can't do it alone, and it's part of the process, part of what we talk about a lot in this show, but some people say it differently. And I don't think I've heard it being said quite this way. How we
I think leading together is part of how we operate. That's definitely how I operate. But you mentioned that different people say it differently. Brené Brown actually calls it collective courage. And I think that the way that we lead together is that we have to be willing to show up. You mentioned this about being seen, have a voice at the table. We have to be able to do that in order to be able to move forward and envision a future, especially with an organization that is charged with taking care of people, social responsibility, or even turning a profit. You can't do that if you're not working together.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a really good point you make, because, often they look at collaboration and transparency and vulnerability as really just way too soft, like really not lending itself to the bottom line. I'd be curious to know, how have you seen this play out to the opposite in the work that you do, where being that type of leader and the team being that connected has actually helped you either drive new business for the bottom line, or improve product, something. I know it's not a product, but something where it's maybe it's getting new grants because there was a new way you thought about doing something. I don't quite know how that would look, but is there some way that you've seen kind of direct monetary even value based upon being the leader you are and creating that kind of team and collaborative connection focus with your people?
We have, and it's part of what got me up on that stage for the C-Suite Award. Our organization in the past went through, and our organization has some dark history in terms of financial strain, and we went through a time period about 5 years ago where there were layoffs, and we really disappointed the community in a couple of different spots. And as you know, it's very hard for organizations to repair their reputation, to get back the trust of employees. I was not in a leadership role at the time that happened, but since I have moved into my current role, and then also we got a new CEO a couple years ago, very visionary leader, and everything that we do is a people-first strategy, and that was not how the organization used to operate. And so by shifting our frame and making our strategic plan the priority first to take care of our people, to make sure that they're engaged, to make sure that they have the information and the tools they need to do their job, to make sure that they have consistent supervision and support no matter what area that they work in, we went from a 30, and I've heard numbers as high as 42% turnover rate to now 19% in just a couple years. Wow. And we had previously done some engagement surveys around net promoter scores and tried to be a candidate for one of those top workplaces that's done regionally. And this past year in 2018, I believe, the survey was done in 2018, we got it. And we were selected by our staff as one of the top workplaces in the Denver metro area. And so if you think about the return on that type of effort and focus to make sure that we're taking care of our people, not just financially, but also with information and heart, and making sure that they have that voice, we have dramatically changed this organization. And I'm very proud to have been a part of that. It's not a one-woman show. There are a lot of people who have done that, but we are all heading in the same direction, all leading in that same way, and being willing to really be open and honest with staff about, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We recognize we were in a tough place. We need to work together. What do you need? And it has absolutely transformed the organization. Oh,
I love it. I love it. And I hear that was an amazing story. That absolutely demonstrates why I do it. I do. So I love it. It's a validation is what it does, right? It validates it.
Yep.
It makes me go, like, people ask me, well, does this show you do, like, does it like make you anything or grow your business? And I'm like, well, I'm going to be honest. This is more about heart for me. This is an investment of heart And I
Yeah.
like to have these conversations. And yes, I have had a return, but I'm not in it for that. Really never was. In fact, this book that's coming out based upon this podcast actually wasn't even the reason why I started the show. It was literally just to have conversations like this with people like you who just,
Mhm.
oh goodness, just
It
amazing.
makes a difference. It doesn't matter what industry sector you're in, this work that you're doing and how you pull it together and communicate with folks from all different sectors, this is the work that makes people more satisfied with their job. It brings meaning to their work. Again, it doesn't matter what you're doing. When you have leaders who value their employees and aren't afraid to show them how much they care, it makes people feel really good about their work. And there is a direct relationship between engaged employees and revenue. That I read a study once, and I'm not going to be able to quote where it comes from, but if you increase employee engagement by even 10%, it will have a 147% increase in revenue. So this work does make, this is not soft. This work makes a difference in the business environment.
Yeah. And it's funny because it drives me nuts that people say soft, and I know where you said it because everybody says soft, right?
Oh,
And it's so hard. Like soft makes me think
mm-hmm,
easy, and it's actually like
mm-hmm.
hard. So even though
It is.
hard numbers are hard, I feel like this is
Right,
the hardest part, you know?
right.
Oh, that's awesome. I really appreciate it. That's great. And all of the vulnerability and the sharing. And, sometimes it's hard for us, especially because this is a global podcast. So you don't know who's listening to this, but it
Yeah.
is, like you said, it is so much more impactful that you're willing to put yourself out there. Someone's going to take away more than one thing from this call, right?
I hope so. I hope so. They're listening for a reason too. They know somewhere in their heart and soul that this stuff really does matter.
I agree with you. I know. Now, so I'm curious when everything is getting like crazy, when the caseloads are high and everybody's working and caring for patients and dealing with just vendors and all this stuff. How do you reconnect with your team? What are the things that you do specifically to reconnect with your people when you get kind of disconnected?
I think the real goal is to prevent the disconnect from happening in the first place. Mm-hmm. So, we have a lot of proactive, regular one-to-one meetings with each of our staff. We use those meetings to give a safe space for them to think out loud, to be curious, to express their concerns. And I always want to make sure that that's allowed. And I don't view disagreement or differences of opinion as a bad thing. I think that's where sometimes some of the most creative perspectives come from. So a lot of that question, I think we have to be careful. Maybe we're not actually disconnected, that we are just making sure that people have their voices heard, that they're not hesitating to give feedback. You mentioned this as well. It's really important for me to have people feel valued. And so that when we do have a disconnect, I suppose that inevitably that does happen. I have been known to call that out privately and to ask the question, help me understand why this is important to you. Help me understand your experience. And the preventative piece to me is that I want to know each of my staff, I want to know the lens through which they see the world. And we have done an exercise. We did one not too long ago where we had each leader identify their top 2 values. And everybody shared it with each other, and it was incredibly powerful because it allowed me especially to better understand how people operate and think. So one of our leaders is driven by the value of compassion, which sounds great, right? Like that makes sense, especially in my field. And it is. She's a wonderful human being. She's an amazing leader, but even being compassionate has a downside, or it can result in a disconnect. So someone who's compassionate may say yes too quickly, or they may not express disagreement. And so one of the ways that I help to prevent disconnect is to make sure that value that's driving her is not coloring or impairing her ability to be able to really have an honest conversation about where she's at. So I really think that, when you understand a coworker's values and how they view work and feedback and different situations that occur that might be one that's coming from a place of disagreement, that understanding their values is really what helps keep the culture connected. And I really believe that we have to see each other through the values we bring to the table in the work environment. You don't just do that at home. You have to do it at work too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like we're not all cookie cutter, right? We just have a different way that we see things. And like when I do a lot of DISC communication and behavioral style training,
Sure.
and when I'm doing that, like to see people in the room and their light bulb goes off. It's like, whoa, like I'm doing that to people around me. And then it's like, ooh, I don't realize that person wants this from me, Right. And when you see that, it's not quite values, but values enter into that discussion often based upon how they prefer to be communicated to, and how they behave around people, things like that. Right. So it does. Any way we can get into the lens of the other person, we're just going to be much more effective with them. So I agree.
Yeah, and your use of the DISC is one way. A lot of people use StrengthsFinder. Emergenetics, is that how you say it? There's another one. I mean, these are all really helpful as a way to be able to see ourselves and to be able to see our blind spots.
Yes.
I think there's incredible value when teams do that. And again, a lot of that I view not just as team building, but as building a culture of connection to try and prevent that disconnect from happening.
Love that, building a culture of connection. That's great. Culture. And that might be the title of the show, just so you know. I title each of these based upon what someone says, and that was amazing there. There's been, by the way, tons of amazing stuff that you've said, so I'll have to go back and really comb through that and see.
Oh, thanks, Heather. I wrote about a culture of connection in an article that was in the Denver Business Journal, and like you're saying, for the show title, it picked up a lot of traction. I don't know that it's necessarily unique, but I think that that's part of the driver. That's part of where we come from. People have a universal desire to work, to live in a culture that is connected. And when we're disconnected, that's when we struggle. So the more we can do as a society, as a learning community, to be able to build that culture of connection, I think is really, really imperative to our success.
I love that. So what would be, so you've given obviously that, but I'm going to ask a question, and maybe it would be some of the things you've already talked about, but I'm sure it'll be framed in a different way. What would be, for those leaders who are listening now, who might have either be at a crossroads or may just need a little extra oomph to get through the week or the day, what might be some pearls of wisdom you might lead them with?
Pearls. I think that it's really important. I know. Don't we all?
Yeah.
I think that it's very important that people love the work that they do and the people that they work with. And I am not afraid to bring that love into the workplace. You heard me say that when I was talking to my folks at the ceremony. Yeah. We have a committee that we put together that focuses on diversity and inclusiveness by incorporating our values into the work that we do. And we're terming it love, living our values every day.
Ooh, I love that.
Isn't it good?
That's
Well, that wasn't my idea, but I love it.
Yes.
And I think that part of what you think about as someone is struggling or if they're moving up and becoming a leader is that you have to be willing to allow yourself to care about other people. You have to allow yourself to be authentic, even if you're going to get knocked down. And I really do believe that when we live our values in our work, that helps with those connections. It creates a safe space, and that is what is going to have the most impactful impact on your organization. And it's our responsibility as leaders to bring our whole self to work. And I really, really hope that people love the work that they're doing, because we spend so much time at work, just like we do at home, that I really think that it is a true gift when people have that with the people they work with the work that they're doing, so that they can show up every day and feel good about it.
What I love about what you said, that last one about as leaders, we have a responsibility to bring our whole selves to work. Yeah, again, the context in which just saying responsibility, it really is a reframe for most people. They think it's something that some of us can do, some of us don't. Some of us are naturally do it, some of us, and it's kind of like, well, we can take it or leave it. But when you put it in the context of responsibility, it says that irrespective of what maybe your natural style is, that you have to work to be more of the person who is more vulnerable and opens up and shows more of your whole self to all of your people. It does make such a huge difference. I always recount stories of times I was not perfect. So this is not a statement about to make to say I'm perfect, and nobody on this show is perfect. So that's not what I'm saying here. But I just think about over the years, like people reaching out that maybe they were my team before. And they just, they're like, oh, we just miss you so much. And, having the comments of like, yeah, you really cared and you really seemed like you were interested in us and those types of things. And it's like, it's not hard. Like, this is not rocket science, right? Not.
That's right.
You just have to care. Caring, like is caring that hard?
Yeah. Well, and people get hired because they have the skills. So we can put that aside. The people who wind up in leadership positions better have the skills, the talent, the smarts, the willingness to be able to do that. But that's not what keeps people, and that's not what allows leaders to stand out. It's not just about what you know, it's who you are. And that, I believe, is that responsibility that you have to bring to the table at work.
Thank you so much. Oh, so for those who are listening, if you were all wowed like I was, please make sure that you share this episode far and wide, because that's the best way to get it up on the Apple Podcasts and Spotify. There's a lot of leadership podcasts out there. This one is super special, I do believe, because we highlight these stories of the leaders when they maybe weren't the best, and all of the ways that they come out of it is just amazing. So please do share it. And then, of course, everything, you can go to the show notes and find more details there about Cynthia. I might even see if I can find that article, if it's possible, and put that there so you can access that as well. So this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining the show, Cynthia.
Loved it. Thanks, Heather.
And thanks for joining the Leadership with Heart podcast, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.